Welcome back to my channel. My name's Michael, and it's that time of year where we look at some of our favourite books of the year. So I thought I'd do a rough top 10 list of the 10 books that I've read this year that I really enjoyed the most. This is not necessarily the best 10 books. These are just the 10 standouts for me that I think really shaped my reading year. These are the ones that have stuck with me the most, and it's been such an amazing reading year for me. So it has been very difficult for me to narrow it down to 10. I could probably do a top 20 and still miss out on some of the books, but I thought 10 seems a nice round number. I'm going to start with 10 and work my way back to 1, and I'm going to start with a book that's probably the most recent book that I've read, and that's Space Invaders by Nona Fernández, and this is translated from the Spanish by Natasha Wimmer. This is a Chilean book, and it is the most recent book that I've read. It has been stuck in my thoughts for a couple of days now, and I think there's something amazing about it. It doesn't tell you how to feel, how to react to the emotions. There's a lot of work you have to do on yourself to like read between the lines, and I really appreciate that in a book. I think that makes a book far more interesting. This is looking at these children growing up, particularly in the 80s, with memories of space invaders, and looking at the political landscape and how devastating everything is, but not being able to do anything about it, feeling hopeless. And I kind of had that feeling. It's like I remember this nostalgia kind of works for me, and with the political stuff now, sometimes it feels so hopeless, like you can't do anything. So I really connected with this book on that level, and I've been thinking about it a lot. So that's why it's at number 10. I think if I had more time, it might have been higher, it might have been lower, but at the moment, it's one that I think deserves to be on this list. At number 9, I'm going to go with Paradise Rot, and this is what I read, the first book I read in Women in Translation, but this is written by Jenny Hval and translated by Marjam, Idriss, and this is so sensory, so captivating with the imagery that it portrays. And I've talked about this on my podcast where I discuss some of the best books of the year with Agnes from Beyond the Epilogue. I'll link that in the show notes. But there's something about this book that really hit home for me. I think there's something brilliant about it. It kind of looking at this breakdown of a relationship, and at the same time you're seeing the decay of this house that they're living in, with the mold taking over the walls and mushrooms starting to sprout from the mold. And I think the two work really well to create this interesting story, and it's something so unique and so different from anything else I've read. So that's why I put it on this list, and that's why I think more people should check it out. Next, I'm going to go with The Slinks by Tatyana Tolstaya, and this is translated from the Russian by Jamey, Gambrell, and this kind of speaks volumes to just the quality of the books on my list, because this is so low down my list at number 7, and yet it's such a brilliant book. It's such an amazing book that should probably be on anyone's top 10 list if they read it that year. There's something about it. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic, post-Stalin, post-nuclear novel. It's set in Moscow after the nuclear holocaust, and they're trying to rebuild the city, and one leader decided he's going to be supreme leader, he's going to be the new Stalin, and the narrator's kind of set with this task of transcribing old literature and old text and make it seem like this leader is the author of these books. So we've got some references there to some dystopian literature and to history. It's such an interesting book. But what I love about it is Tatyana Tolstoya's humor. It's just so perfect. I think she has this unique voice and she's got this style, and the humor is just this dry wit that I really appreciate. I just can't speak enough about how wonderful this book is. And even though it's at number 7, I think it's a spectacular book and worth everyone checking out. Actually, that was book number 8, just calculating again. Book number 7 was Death in Spring, so this is by Mercè, Rodoreda, and translated by Martha Tennent, and this is a Catalan classic. I did a review of this recently. It is this weird, dark, interesting story, so complex, so layered, and it makes me wish I knew more about Rodereda's life and about Catalan history, because I think there's so much in this book that I've missed, and there's so much in this book that is definitely worth exploring. And it's so weird and unique. It will take you on this wild ride that follows this village with these really insane traditions and cultural ideas, from the idea of burying their dead in trees, but also pouring concrete down their throats so the soul can't escape. And there is so much more of that weirdness coming through, and it's just an interesting book to see how they use these cultural and traditions to kind of control the people and try to stop them having thoughts that might go against what the government wants them to think and feel. At number 6 is a book that I thought might have actually been my top read of the year, but when I go back and reflect on everything, it seems like I've had such a brilliant reading year that there are other books that I think are much better than this. But I really did think, after finishing Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann, that this may be my number 1 pick. This may be the one that sat at the number 1 spot, which is going to be really interesting because I read a lot of translations. Having a non-translation at number 1 would have been very strange and very unexpected, but I honestly thought this book was going to be there. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I think a lot of people have reviewed it, a lot of people have talked about it. I don't know if I have anything interesting to say about it, but I have been thinking about doing a review of this book and putting it up on my channel, but I keep putting it off, or I keep talking myself out of it. So if you think that's something you would like to see from me, let me know. However, at this time, I think there's enough reviews out there. I don't know if I have anything else interesting to say. Having said that, having your own review up there can be useful for the future. Now we're getting down to the top 5. At number 5, I went with Notes of a Crocodile by Miaojin, translated by Bonnie Huie. I feel like I've talked about this book a few times in recent videos, and for great reason, because I think this is an amazing insight into feeling like an outsider, feeling like you don't belong into a society. The basic premise of this novel is queer people are depicted as crocodiles in this world, and it's a satire on this feeling of feeling like an outsider. They feel like they don't belong, they feel like they're less than human, and the world kind of treats them that way. Like, these are rare sightings, or these are aliens living amongst them, these are crocodiles, these are not humans. And that intense sadness and mistreatment is so powerful and so impacting. And I think that's what made this book really worth reading. I think that's why I've put it on my list. And it's a book that I'm definitely going to be reading again. And I think it's an important book to read. I feel like it's something worth exploring. And number four, I think it's another important book. It's going to be a very difficult book to read for most people. It's about 200 pages. I thought I'd read it in about a week at most. It took me a few weeks because I had to keep setting it down. I had to keep putting it down and just taking an emotional break from it. And that is The Girl on the Ice Floe by Adelaïde Bond. And this is translated from the French by Kover. This is a memoir about uncovering the sexual assault of her younger self. At 9 years old, she was sexually assaulted, and the trauma of it caused the brain to forget what happened. And this is basically a survival memoir about someone trying to come to terms with what happened, trying to understand why sounds or phrases or actions can set her off at any point. And it is devastating to read. But the writing style is so beautiful and so amazing. I just love the way she writes. And I think that kind of drew me in. And she has a style where she's writing about her own experiences in a third person, like she is watching herself do these actions. And the beautiful thing about it is, as she starts to heal, that voice switches from the third to the first person. Like she's started to take control of her life again and started to feel like she is herself. It is such an amazing book. It is so hard to read, but I think it's important to read books like this to get an understanding of what people have gone through, what their experiences are, and what they have to say. Because one of the reasons I read translations is to read about people from around the world, to read about their experiences and their lives. And I don't experience the same things as everyone else experiences, and having these different voices is definitely important. But having said that, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that have experienced similar issues as Adelaïde Bond, and trying to hear what she has to say may be difficult, but I think it's important to understand that these experiences exist, and unfortunately, not all of them end up the way that this narrative did. It's such a difficult book to read, but I really do recommend it. In third place, these last three books are probably books I've talked about over and over again. This one is The Faculty of Dreams by Sarah Stridsberg, translated by Deborah Bragan-Turner. And this is basically a fictionalized account of the last days of Valerie Solanas, who was a radical feminist who tried to assassinate Andy Warhol. And she was thrown into an institute. She was convicted of an assassination attempt, and this fictionalized account of those instances are so interesting because she takes the facts of what happened and she's put her own spin on it. She's really brought to life this character in an interesting way. Valerie Solanas is such an interesting person, and I think she's captured some witty, sassy character here that I don't know if it is genuine to Solanas, but I think it was such a joy to read and so interesting to experience this person's life. While it was a Swedish book, it kind of did read like an American book. I believe Agnes compared it to the Bell Jar, so it gives you a sense too of something that has that very universal feel. And I feel like I'm rambling here about this book, So I will leave it at that, but I do recommend it. At number 2, I'm going to go with The Years by Annie Ernaux, and this is translated by Alison. This is a memoir of her life growing up in France from post World War to the current day, and you get that experience of them living through their lives and experiencing the changes in the world and the technology. And there's a lot of advancements being made since World War II, not just technically, but politically and culturally. And this book is kind of like a documentary on all those changes. It does focus on Annie's life, but it does feel like it is a collective of this is the experience of all these people living in France, and such a beautiful book of the experience and so French, obviously. But I really appreciate it. I like the style because it's kind of like a blend of fiction and non-fiction, where we're telling this memoir, but we still feel like we're reading fiction. And this is a book that I read for the Man Booker International long list. And thankfully, it was on the long list because I may not have read it if it wasn't on that list. And I am so glad that I've read this. I want to read more of her books. Last book on my list at number 1, I think it's The Only Man that has made my top 10, which is interesting. This is A Tunnel by Ernesto Sabato. This is translated by Margaret Sayre Peden. And what I love about this book is it's this Argentinian existential classic. It's so full of angst, it's so full of amazing writing. I just wanted to highlight every page. But I really appreciated this really intense, angsty novel. It's about a struggling artist who gets obsessed with this woman. She becomes his muse, and they do have a relationship, and things do kind of sour off with their relationship, but the plot kind of doesn't really matter. I feel like the plot's not really important when talking about this book. It's just this raw emotion that comes through on the page, this intense angst that kind of drives this book, and I love it. I said on the podcast when talking about this book, this guy needed a MySpace page because that's what it reads like. It feels like someone just writing for a live journal or for a MySpace, and I love that. I really enjoyed reading that, and it was such an experience. And obviously, it's not going to be for everyone, but for me, it was just so wonderful to experience that kind of angst and still have some philosophical and existential exploration going on as well. So those are my top 10 books. I'd love to know which ones you've read, which ones you are planning to read, what your top 10 are, and based on those, if you've got any recommendations, I'd love to hear that as well. So all my links to social media are in the description below, but if you want to talk about these books or what you read this year that you love, I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff if you're interested in translations and moving forward more world cinema as well. So I will catch you in my next video. I did want to do a video on Midsummer, which I haven't done yet, but because it was so close to the end of the year, maybe I'll do a top movies video before I post my review of Midsummer. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.